Also joining me now is Dr. Swasti Rao, who joins us from New Delhi. Dr. Rao is an Associate Fellow at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses. It's a state-funded think tank headquartered in New Delhi. Dr. Rao, welcome to DD India News Hour. Now, let me start by asking you, do you think India's track record, its achievements and ambitions will make it a credible voice at COP28, the voice of the Global South, perhaps?
Right. A very good evening to you, Ramesh.
Welcome.
It's a pleasure to be discussing COP28 today. Yes, I think certain things when it comes to India needs to be put into perspective. So the COP28 has been around for a while. I mean, the concept has been around for a while. But the thing is that if you look at India's, interventions or India's maneuvering within the COP framework, I think it is very clear that, you can see an evolution. So there was a first generation maneuvering or first generation interventions when India was pretty much in the background. If you remember the Kyoto protocols, etc., we keep talking about Kyoto protocols. So those negotiations, India did have a role to play, but it was still in the background.
Right.
You see, but what happened a little later, which I call the second generation, so to say, maneuvering in the climate, diplomacy, that started after, say, the Paris Agreement in 2015, because we all know that the Kyoto Protocol could not really sustain, and the rich country particularly were not very happy with the way it was formulated. Anyway, so then came the Paris Agreement, and after that, we've been seeing India's role growing, I would say very substantially. And the main things that we see when it comes to India, and you mentioned Global South, is that, India has come in the foreground. India has become much more assertive than it ever was, and it has also become assertive in offering its own narrative. Now, what is its own narrative? I think if you look carefully, one of the things that India has stood for, particularly in context, of the G20 summit this year. So even in the G20, there were connections which were made about how India blocked the final draft outcome, which was almost a last-minute thing, which was about the phase out versus the phase down. And you were just mentioning and discussing it with Tapas right now. That is the entire thing. Actually, even right now in Dubai, as the COP28 is happening, and Tapas mentioned that this particular meeting is more like a stock, a stock take of what really has happened, and there will be clashes around the phase out versus phase down. I think India has been very, very, committed to the concerns of the Global South. Developing economies which can't really afford a phase out approach to fossil fuels. Right. So this is very important. Other than that, India has been also instrumental in meeting the targets of its own NDCs, which are nationally determined contributions. So I think in that sense, India has also put out this, has led by giving example, where India has done that and most of the developed world has not been able to do that. And then add to that, there are also several Indian initiatives which have been outside the COP, which are like, for example, thanks to G20, it's all now very well known, things like the International Solar Alliance, which is a full-fledged UN-affiliated multilateral agency, the CDRI. India has also got the International Energy Agency to do an analysis of its own proposals. Then you keep hearing about, lifestyle for environment. You keep hearing the Prime Minister's proposal for the pro-planet people, where we have tried to connect it to the masses, etc. So I think what I wish to say and conclude my point with that India's, commitment to multilateralism, especially climate multilateralism, and within climate multilateralism, in a very, very assertive manner, standing for the rights of the Global South and being sensitive to the economic demands of their economic, maturity. I think that has really been taken very seriously, and I think that is why India is so ideally placed to be playing this role. So I'm sure we're going to discuss much more later, but for I think this is what really shows India's commitment to climate goals.
Indeed, fair enough. Point taken, Dr. Rao. Excuse me. We keep hearing the word stock taking, so I have to ask you this. Now, I interviewed the Foreign Minister of Seychelles last week in New Delhi. The minister said that the various iterations of COP, that they've been nothing more than a talk shop. Countries talk a lot, but nothing much gets done, especially for the small island states that are at the front line of the climate crisis. Do you feel the same way?
Well, yes. Again, we need to put this into perspective
Sure.
again. See, look at COP, for example, right? This argument that it becomes a global stock take and a talk shop, etc. Well, it's not completely wrong, Ramesh, right? I mean, right now, what is happening is that it's all just an assessment of whether the world has been on track to meet the Paris goals, and the stock take happens every 5 years. And if you look at all the other stock takes, I mean, before the COP28, which is now going to happen, the conclusion which is reached out every single time is that the world is off track.
Right.
So I think when the other countries which are at the forefront of the climate crisis come and say that this doesn't really help, they are not completely wrong. And it is because of that that India has, put together initiatives like the CDRI that I was mentioning, that takes a very holistic and comprehensive view of how to tackle climate disasters, etc. And that is why I said that India's diplomacy, especially in climate, climate diplomacy is something which is pretty on point. But coming back to the global stocktake problem, so of course, I mean, this year this is what we are going to be talking about. And again, I mean, imagine that President Biden is not attending the summit. I think Xi Jinping is not attending the summit. I'm not sure. I don't think President Putin is attending the summit either. So I mean, all I'm saying is that you can totally see how serious are the global, I mean, at least the Western economies and developed economies like China, who sometimes pretend to be in the developing world but actually are not there anymore, and how serious are they about all this. So you can totally see that somewhere the onus is lying on countries which are sensitive to the concerns of the global south, and that is why India's concerns seem so genuine. So we are going to be talking about this. I'm not sure, because it is happening in Dubai. You did mention that, and Tapas mentioned that too, that this year as well there is going to be a clash of two main things. One, of course, is that who is going to give and how much money who is going to give for that 100 billion fund. So though it was put together, in one of the previous COPs, but no headway has been made. And I mean, how do you determine whose responsibility is how much, right? So I think that is going to be a thorny agenda, and I'm not sure that any clear formula is going to be reached because of the way the world is mired into, several conflicts. I would say the Ukraine war here and the West Asian conflict there. And number two, the other two thorny issue would definitely be about the phase out versus the phase down. So while Dubai keeps saying that, that we would need to phase down, I think they are not really ready for it, like any other OPEC country. And I think it's like a long-term agenda that they would be looking at in coming years than to come up with a formula right away.
Mafri, that's all the time we have for Dr. Rao. Thank you once again for joining us and sharing your thoughts with our viewers at home and abroad. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.